Hello and welcome. I'm Louise Watt and this is Correspondents, where we talk about the news and what's going on behind the news with reporters around the region. It's the election everyone's still talking about. Donald Trump has stormed to victory in the US, winning not only the presidency, but control of the House and the Senate. In short, he's got a lot of power. So what does this mean for Taiwan and China? How will Trump, who campaigned heavily on tariffs, deal with Taipei and Beijing? And could Elon Musk, now in Trump's inner circle, play a diplomatic role between Beijing and Washington? We'll take a closer look. Also ahead, we investigate why China's Coast Guard has taken an unprecedented role in military drills around Taiwan, as Beijing seeks to push its territorial claims over the island. Plus, he's the Communist Party's chief ideologue, whose job it is to win over Taiwan. But just who is Wang Huning? To discuss all of this, I'm joined by Chris Buckley of the New York Times, who reports on China and Taiwan from here in Taipei, and Vic Chiang, a reporter and researcher for the Washington Post's China Bureau. Thank you both for joining me on Correspondents.
Pleased to be here.
Let's start with the man of the moment, Donald Trump, US president in waiting. He has a long list of things he'll say he'll do: deporting illegal immigrants, strengthening the economy, stopping wars. Chris, how important do you think Taiwan is going to be to him?
I think even if Donald Trump doesn't realize it now, Taiwan is actually going to be very important to him and his administration the next 4 years. Like you were saying, he's got an awfully long list of other things to deal with, including migration at home, the US economy, the Ukraine war, the Middle East, and so on. But we've seen from Donald Trump's comments that one of his focuses will be the trade relationship with China and the broader relationship with China. Now, if he wants to deal with China, he's also going to have to deal with the issue of Taiwan.
So Vic, Donald Trump will have to deal with Taiwan, whether he feels at the moment it's an issue for him or not. How do you see this?
Well, what we've seen from Donald Trump for now is that his comments is a little bit different from what Biden has been commenting on Taiwan. For example, before the election, on his campaign trail, Trump had received an interview from Fox News. He was asked by the anchor at Fox News that whether Trump will come to Taiwan's defense were China to launch an attack on Taiwan. And Trump's response at that time was that he's not going to answer this question because, quote unquote, it might jeopardize his negotiating abilities with China. What we can expect is that we probably is not going to see in Trump what we have seen in Biden, which over the past 4 years, he has said publicly 4 times that he's going to come to Taiwan's defense if China is going to launch an attack on Taiwan. And that is going to be something that the Taiwanese government has to think about.
Well, let's look at what the Taiwanese government's response was. Taiwan's president, Lai Ching-te, he sent his congratulations to Donald Trump on his victory. He wrote on X, "I'm confident that the long-standing Taiwan-US partnership, built on shared values and interests, will continue to serve as a cornerstone for regional stability and lead to greater prosperity for us all." Chris, the US relationship's obviously very important to Taiwan. The US is Taiwan's biggest international backer. It's bound by its own law to make sure Taiwan has the means to defend itself. What do you think, given that Trump is widely accepted to be unpredictable and transactional in his dealings, what can the Taiwanese government expect from him, do you think?
Well, I think the Taiwanese government has made it clear that it's very committed to building a constructive relationship with the Trump administration, no matter what he says from day to day, and also working through Congress, where Taiwan has a lot of friends as well, to build a strong relationship with the incoming administration. As you say, Trump is very unpredictable, and the makeup of his new administration is still not fully formed, but it's You know, it's a mixture of people with very different views about China, some of them very hawkish. But I think amid all the unpredictability, we've seen Trump repeatedly throughout the election campaign and previously focus on two issues very relevant to Taiwan. One of them is his demand that the Taiwanese government significantly increase its defense spending. He said up to 10% of GDP. I'm not sure if that's possible, but the demand is there. And also he has put Taiwan in his sights as one of those economies that needs to significantly reduce its trade surplus with the United States. Just finally related to that as well, he's made these accusations, I don't think experts entirely buy them, that Taiwan has in effect stolen semiconductor superiority from the United States. So amid all the unpredictability, I think there can be some predictability that those three issues, defense, trade and semiconductors, are going to be the big themes in Taiwan-US relations for the next 4 years.
And it's interesting, isn't it? Because, of course, we've seen Trump before. There's already been 4 years of a President Trump. And at that time, Trump was very popular in Taiwan, wasn't he? To the extent that when he lost the 2020 election to Biden, there was actually a lot of disappointment among the Taiwanese public. But Vic, you've been speaking to people who say they're concerned this time about Trump. What's changed?
Well, I think in Taiwan, the discussion about the U.S. election this time is less fervent compared to 4 years ago. And at that time, as you said, there were a lot of Trump supporters in Taiwan. And because at that time, people were pretty concerned that Biden administration might foster stronger ties with China and thus sacrificing Taiwan's interest. But what we have seen over the past 4 years, that is not what had happened. What had actually happened was that there was stronger bipartisan support coming from the US for Taiwan. And I think in Taiwan, people have seen that kind of support, and therefore their anxiety about the election result this time is kind of dialed down a little bit.
I'd just add one thing on top of what Vic was saying, which is, when we talk about relations in the world, we often focus on Taiwan and the United States. But we have to remember that Trump is coming in at a time when the whole international landscape is very uncertain and changing. And one of the big issues that will have knock-on effects for Taiwan is how the new administration deals with the Ukraine war. And we've seen Donald Trump already promise that he's going to fix the war, stop the war very quickly, even before he comes into office, he said. Now, that might not be possible, but the knock-on effects of the new administration's decisions on how it deals with Ukraine, what sort of peace Ukraine has to accept, possibly, that will have knock-on effects for much of the rest of the world, but particularly for Taiwan, given how much focus there's been here about the lessons from Taiwan, and that is sort of being a test case of American commitment in the rest of the world.
And what's your feeling from the people you're talking to? Because definitely when people outside Taiwan, they're always looking at a timetable when China might possibly attack Taiwan. And given that Trump has said his presidency will be a peaceful one, he will end the wars in Ukraine and the Middle East. On the other hand, he's unpredictable. So how do you see the likelihood of China launching some kind of attack on Taiwan? Has that likelihood gone up, given that Trump has now been elected?
I'm not one of these people who believes that Xi Jinping has a calendar behind his desk in which he's ticking off the days to a particular time for a move on Taiwan. I think it's much more complicated than that. As you say, Donald Trump has said he wants to be a president who presides over a period of peace, but his other slogan has been peace through strength. And so I think part of what we may see is also a renewed effort to rebuild American military strength, particularly in this part of the world. Now, how China responds to that is going to be very important as well. So it might not be a period of war that we're talking about, but those moves by Trump administration could bring deeper tensions with China in this region and around Taiwan.
Okay, well, as you've both said, actually, the US-Taiwan relationship depends a lot on China. Let's turn now to China-US relations under Trump. So Chinese President Xi Jinping congratulated Trump on his victory and said the US and China must find the right way to get along for the good of both countries and the world. But for his new team, he's picked some quite hardline, more hawkish figures on China than Beijing's been dealing with up to now. He's nominated Senator Marco Rubio as Secretary of State and Representative Mike Waltz as National Security Advisor, both harsh China critics. Chris, what kind of signal do you think this sends to Beijing?
Well, sitting here in Taipei, I'm not going to pretend to be an expert on the inner workings of the Trump circle. Even in Washington, that seems to be a big challenge. But I think what we can see, even from this distance, that Donald Trump has again and again returned to the importance of the economic and trade relationship with China as being the issue that he wants to focus on. Now, that doesn't mean that Marco Rubio and other people who share more hawkish views on China are going to be entirely silent, but it does seem that they're going to have to put themselves behind Donald Trump's priorities. But as we were saying as well, Louise, no matter what Donald Trump may want, in the end, the China-US relationship is defined by so much more as well. And that security-military relationship is going to remain a point of tension between them. And if we do see a more assertive Trump administration in this part of the world, that's going to, I think, quite likely lead to new tensions, even as Trump is trying to build some sort of trade deal with China.
We'll get on to the trade relationship in a moment, but I just want to stick with Marco Rubio for a second, because Marco Rubio has actually been sanctioned twice by Beijing. He's banned from traveling to China over his support for the Hong Kong protests and Uyghurs in Xinjiang. How will that work? How is it possible for a Secretary of State to do business with China, do you think?
I think it might create some sort of a dilemma similar to the one that we see when China appointed defense minister a few years ago. And he was also sanctioned by the U.S. over China's arms deals with Russia. So there were a lot of tensions and this process of rebuilding trust.
I would guess in the end that Chinese government, whatever its policies, does also have a pragmatic streak. And if it takes quietly ignoring those sanctions to have meetings with Marco Rubio, I'm sure they'll go ahead. China-US relationship is really conducted between the presidents and the people around them, and not purely through the State Department. So who's going to be China's Trump whisperer in that relationship? We don't know. Like, people talk about Elon Musk. I'd be surprised if he's the one who's carrying all the messages, but he is in the background now as well.
Well, he is very interesting, isn't he? Because he has a role in Trump's new administration. It's a government efficiency role. It's not a role to do with foreign policy. It's not a role to do with China. And yet his company, Tesla, clearly deeply invested in China. He has relatively friendly relations with the Chinese leadership. He's met Xi Jinping. He's met the Premier Vic Chiang many times. Vic, he could be a good go-between between Washington and Beijing, don't you think?
I think this is the kind of hope that a lot of Chinese people are hoping for as well. And if you look at Chinese social media, Weibo, after U.S. Announced its election result, people were all talking about Elon Musk. Elon Musk has this nickname in Chinese called Ma Bao Guo, which literal translation would be Musk, the protector of the country, and by country here it meant China. So you can kind of tell the kind of popularity that Elon Musk has in China.
So he's seen as the protector because of all his investments within China. The world's richest man really would throw all his weight around against anything that would affect those investments.
Yeah, I think that also says that people hope that he can be this potential intermediary between China and the US, and he can be that buffer to improve the China-US relations.
Okay, well, let's look now at one of Trump's big campaign promises, tariffs. Trump said before the election that he would put a blanket tariff of 10 to 20% on all imports, with additional tariffs of 60% or higher on goods from China. Chris, last time Trump was president, there was a trade war between the US and China. Is it simply more of the same this time around?
Well, who knows? It's a new Trump administration. It's a Trump administration who people in Washington say is even more untethered from the voices of the traditional foreign policy and trade establishment. So I think we have seen that Donald Trump, even if this 60% tariff goal is not actually achieved, is very committed to exercising some sort of tariff-based rebalancing of trade with China, but also with other economies as well, including Taiwan. So I think it's going to be a continuing issue.
It's clearly been a confrontational tone from Donald Trump on the campaign trail towards China. But could he be forced to work with China, given that he said he could end the war in Ukraine very quickly? China might have some leverage with Russia there. Chris, might he have to win Beijing over?
It's difficult to tell, but I think we know a few things about how China conducts its foreign policy. And one of them is that, especially under Xi Jinping, there's been this fundamental commitment to the relationship with Russia under Vladimir Putin. And they can have their friction, most recently over Russia organizing North Korean troops to go to near the battlefields with Ukraine and things like that. But when it comes to that key relationship with Russia, Xi Jinping and his leadership will put up with an awful lot to maintain that relationship. So if you start thinking about scenarios where a Trump administration may ask Xi Jinping to help on peace talks, I can't imagine that Xi Jinping would want to wager too much of the relationship with Russia on becoming a go-between there. I just don't see Xi Jinping as seeing that in China's interest.
All right, let's take a quick break for the moment. You're watching Correspondents on TaiwanPlus. Next up, we'll talk Chinese pressure on Taiwan in the form of influence campaigns and the Coast Guard. And we'll see what's on our guests' reporters' notebooks. Back in a moment. Welcome back to Correspondents. I'm Louise Watt. China's Coast Guard played an unprecedented role in military drills around Taiwan in October, participating in a simulated blockade of Taiwan and fully encircling the island. Vic, you've been reporting on this action by the Chinese Coast Guard. It's unusually aggressive behavior from them. Why?
It's an aggressive action coming from them, but also they are also using a lot of different ways to communicate with the Taiwanese on this action. If we remember during the drill, the Chinese Coast Guard also put out this propaganda picture where the Coast Guard vessels encircle Taiwan in the shape of a heart, and seemingly they're saying that this encirclement is an act of love for their Taiwanese compatriots. But for the Taiwanese officials, of course, they don't see it as an act of love. Chinese Coast Guard is overseen by the Central Military Commission, which is the top military agency in China, and so which is basically making them effectively a branch of the People's Liberation Army. For Taiwan, they are facing a lot more difficulties in dealing with the Chinese Coast Guards, not just because of the military tensions, but also because China is using these Coast Guards to launch a legal warfare. By sending these Coast Guards, by involving these Coast Guards in the drills, they are basically saying that they are trying to turn Taiwan Strait and waters around Taiwan into their internal water, where they can legally conduct law enforcement activities, not just against Taiwan military, but also against other civilian ships.
Okay, so Taiwan receiving pressure on the seas, but it's not just that, is it? Because it's influence campaigns as well. And Chris, you've been speaking to people who know the Communist Party official whose job now is to convince Taiwanese of the merits of unification with China. What have you found out?
I did some reporting on Wang Huning, who, as head of China's United Front sector, part of his responsibility is dealing with political relations with Taiwan. And essentially that at the moment that means dealing with Taiwanese opposition politicians and other groups. Previously he was very involved in developing policies and techniques to deepen Chinese Communist Party control of opinion and social relations in China. And I think if somebody's now bringing that experience and those ideas to thinking through how the Chinese Communist Party can sharpen its influence within Taiwan, not simply at the government level, but also reaching deeper into Taiwanese society.
Another part of China's influence campaigns is offering free trips to officials within Taiwan, like neighborhood chiefs, the sort of the low-level elected officials. Vic, you've been interviewing some of these neighborhood chiefs that were invited to go on these free trips. What happens on these trips?
A lot of these neighborhood chiefs have shared with me their itinerary and how these trips were going. And it was interesting to see that for many of them, they just need to pay the flight tickets. And China, when they landed in China, they will cover everything from accommodation, transportation, like you name it. And that will definitely include some propaganda sightseeing spots for them to visit to kind of like educate them how to love the motherland. But I'm also uncertain about how effective these kind of free trips or this kind of overture to the Taiwanese people are, because I also interview neighborhood chiefs in Tainan, like he's really supportive of lighting the really supportive of DPP, but he still went on these trips. And the reason he told me was that he has to take up at least one spot so that he can make sure that there will be one less person to be quote unquote brainwashed by China. I'm not sure if the goal is to interfere with Taiwan's election, and I'm not really sure if they are like meeting the goal that China wants this free trip to have.
Yeah, really, it's just perhaps giving some of these neighborhood chiefs some free sightseeing. All right, so before we go, let's just go to our regular segment to end the show. What's on your reporter's notebook? What are you both covering at the moment or looking ahead to in the coming weeks, Chris?
Well, in the coming weeks and coming months and coming years, Louise, I'm afraid
Is it Trump?
It's back to the Trump administration again. But I think particularly in Taiwan, we're very much aware of wanting to tell Taiwan's story as Taiwan, not simply as a sort of a pawn or a Lego piece in the relationship between China and the United States. So we've got stories coming up about Taiwanese culture and religion.
Vic, what's on your reporter's notebook?
Coming back to the question that we began with was to see how important Taiwan might be to Trump. I think we will have some indicators to look at this thing, like when Trump inaugurates on January 20th, we will see whether he will invite the current Taiwanese representative to the U.S. to his inauguration. The Biden administration did so for the first time, invited Xiao Beking, who was the Taiwan representative to the U.S., to his inauguration.
And that set up the Biden administration support for Taiwan, really, the rock-solid support, that phrase that kept getting repeated throughout these 4 years.
So we can see what kind of foundation that Trump will pave for the future Taiwan-U.S. relations.
Okay. Vic John of The Washington Post, Chris Buckley of The New York Times, thank you very much, both of you, for joining me on Correspondents.
Thank you. It's been fun.
Thank you for having us.
And thank you for watching. If you're seeing this on YouTube, subscribe to the Correspondents playlist to get the latest episodes. I'm Louise Watt. Take care. I'll see you next time.